Did you know that the Social Security Administration just made a major policy change that could affect millions of Americans? If you've ever had to deal with overpayments, you'll want to hear about this. The SSA has just released a set of updates that could make it easier for you to avoid paying back overpayments and potentially save you money in the process. Whether you're on SSI, SNAP, or other government assistance programs, these new changes could make a big difference in your financial life. In today's video, we'll break down the latest updates and what they mean for you, including how the SSA is now making it easier to get out of overpayments and how these changes could help lower-income households. Stick around until the end to get the full picture of these new rules and how they could benefit you. Welcome to Financial Area, your go-to place for important financial news. Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps us bring you more valuable content like this. Let's get started. On November 25, 2024, the Social Security Administration made a major announcement that is set to reshape how overpayment waivers are handled. This update comes just as Commissioner Martin Mully is preparing to leave the SSA, possibly to take on a new political role, and many are seeing it as his final push to leave a lasting impact on the agency. The changes were introduced with one main goal: to make it easier for individuals, particularly those receiving low-income benefits, to avoid the financial burden of repaying overpayments. For millions of Americans, especially those already struggling to make ends meet, these new rules are a big win. One of the most significant changes is how the SSA will now approach the question of fault when it comes to overpayments. In the past, individuals often had to prove they weren't at fault for the overpayment. If you received more benefits than you should have, it was on you to show that you weren't responsible. But with the new rules, the SSA will start from a neutral position, meaning they will need to prove you are at fault before asking you to repay anything. This shift takes much of the pressure off individuals, especially those without legal experience or resources, making the process less intimidating and more fair. Alongside this, the SSA has made a major change for people receiving government assistance. If you're on programs like SSI, food stamps, or Medicare, the agency will now automatically presume that you can't repay any overpayment. This means you won't have to provide additional documentation proving you can't afford to repay it. The SSA will simply assume you're financially unable to do so. This is a huge relief for those who may have been forced into lengthy and complicated paperwork, just to show they don't have the means to pay back small overpayments. Now, if you fall into certain categories, you don't have to worry about that at all. The system is designed to take your financial reality into account without burdening you with more hoops to jump through. Another part of the update affects households with low income. If your household income is at or below 150% of the federal poverty level, the SSA will now automatically assume you can't repay an overpayment. This change comes at a critical time, as many Americans are struggling with rising costs and shrinking budgets. By presuming financial hardship for these individuals, the SSA is streamlining the process and ensuring that people in dire financial situations aren't penalized further. The goal here is to ease the burden on those who are already financially vulnerable, and these new policies reflect that understanding. The most striking update in this new SSA policy is the increase in resource limits, which will allow individuals and families to retain more assets without it affecting their eligibility for benefits. Prior to this change, the resource limit for a single person was set at $3,000, and for a couple, it was $5,000. This meant that if you had savings, a car, or other resources above those amounts, it could disqualify you from receiving benefits or trigger the repayment of overpayments. However, the SSA has now raised these limits significantly. A single person can now have up to $6,000 in assets, and couples can hold up to $10,000. This is a notable increase that will help many low-income individuals and families preserve their financial security without losing out on much-needed government assistance. In addition to this, the SSA has made important changes to how vehicles are treated. Previously, individuals could only exclude one vehicle from being counted as part of their resources, with some exceptions allowing for a second vehicle in specific circumstances. Now, the rules have expanded to allow households to exclude up to 2 vehicles outright, or even 3 in certain situations. This is a practical change for people who rely on vehicles for work, transportation, or family needs, as it means they won't be penalized for having a second or third vehicle that is necessary for their daily life. Many people live in rural areas where owning multiple vehicles is common, and this rule recognizes the need for flexibility in these situations. Another major change revolves around income and expenses. Previously, the SSA's system for determining whether someone could repay an overpayment was very strict, with only a small margin allowed for income exceeding basic expenses. If your income exceeded your ordinary and necessary household expenses by more than $55, you would be expected to repay any overpayment. But now, that margin has been increased to $250. This means that if your income is only slightly above what you need to cover your essential living expenses, you won't be penalized as harshly as before. This change is especially important for people who may have small income fluctuations, as it gives them a little more breathing room without automatically triggering the repayment of overpayments. These changes are part of a broader effort to make the SSA's overpayment waiver process more accessible and fair. In the past, many recipients were burdened with overpayment debt, even if they were unable to repay it, simply because they didn't meet the strict documentation requirements or income thresholds. Now, by raising the resource limits, expanding the number of vehicles that can be excluded, and adjusting the income expense margin, the SSA is acknowledging the financial struggles that many people face today. These new rules will help ensure that those who are already living at or near the poverty line aren't further penalized for circumstances beyond their control. It's a move toward fairness and efficiency, one that could change how overpayment waivers are handled for years to come. One of the most significant aspects of these changes is the broader impact they'll have on individuals facing overpayment issues. With the new rules in place, the SSA has effectively made it more difficult for the agency to claim that someone is at fault, which in turn makes it easier for recipients to challenge and avoid paying back overpayments. This change will not only provide relief to those who have been unfairly caught in the system, but it also offers a more reasonable approach for those who may have made simple errors when receiving benefits. By shifting the burden of proof to the SSA, individuals can now feel more empowered to dispute overpayment claims without the overwhelming fear of being penalized for mistakes they didn't cause. In particular, the updates will likely have a profound effect on people in low-income households. For those receiving benefits like SSI, food stamps, or Medicare, the SSA's new automatic presumption of inability to repay overpayments removes a significant barrier to financial security. Instead of having to document every little detail about their financial situation, recipients now have one less thing to worry about. These programs are designed to support people in vulnerable financial situations, and by assuming an inability to repay from the outset, the SSA acknowledges that many recipients simply don't have the resources to cover these debts. This policy change ensures that those who are struggling the most aren't further burdened by the overwhelming task of paperwork and repayment. The new resource limits are a critical part of this shift as well. By allowing individuals to hold more in assets without triggering repayment requirements, the SSA is acknowledging that people with lower incomes still need a cushion to survive. It's common for people to rely on a small savings account, an emergency fund, or a vehicle to help them get by, and the new rules recognize that these resources are essential for everyday living. The increased vehicle exclusions, in particular, will benefit individuals who live in areas where multiple vehicles are necessary for work, school, or family life. This is a clear departure from the previous policy, which could penalize someone for owning more than one car, even if it was necessary for their daily routines. Moreover, the raised income expense margin gives low-income families more room to maneuver without facing penalties. For many recipients, even a modest increase in income could push them over the threshold for repayment, but the new rules provide a much more reasonable buffer. With the new $250 margin, households that are just slightly above the poverty line will no longer be forced to repay small overpayments. This change ensures that the SSA's system aligns better with the reality of living on a fixed or low income, where small fluctuations in income are common and major financial burdens can arise from unexpected expenses.